Top Med Talk.
Welcome to Top Med Talk. I'm Desiree Chappell, and we're coming to you from the 5th Collaborative Clinical Trials in Anesthesiology meeting here in Prato, Italy. I've had the opportunity to sit down with one of the presenters here at the Collaborative Clinical Trials meeting, but also a presenter at the BJA, the British Journal of Anesthesia, Women in Anesthesia Conference that was held Tuesday, just a couple of days ago here in Prato as well. We have Meghan Lane-Fall, who is an anesthesiologist from the University of Pennsylvania. Meghan, thank you so much for sitting down with us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Can you give me just an idea of your background at University of Pennsylvania? I know that you do a lot more than anesthesia there.
Sure. So I'm an anesthesia intensivist, and I've been in practice for about 13 years now. I guess that includes my training. But my research interest, the reason I'm here in Prato, is thinking about implementation science and trying to get evidence-based practice into uptake. So I'm excited to be here. You're right, it's a huge networking opportunity, and just an opportunity to share my science with folks and get some feedback.
I was looking at the BJA symposium that went on, and it looks like that you were able to talk about gender and racial diversity in the U.S. anesthesia and critical care workforce. And I followed you a little bit on social media. I just found you after Lee had said that we had to meet and chat, Lee Fleischer. And I think what you're doing for women and gender and race in our country, in the U.S., is phenomenal, and I love the conversation that you're getting in on. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how you've been involved in the U.S., a little bit with that, and then what your discussion was yesterday?
Sure. So being a woman in anesthesia, it's hard not to think about issues related to women in anesthesia. I had some interesting conversations after the symposium about the logistics, or the politics, I should say, around being involved in advocating for women and underrepresented minorities in research. There's a little bit of a risk of being pigeonholed as someone who, as a member of a underrepresented group, is only interested in that group. So for a long time, my professional reputation was really related to my research, which has nothing to do with diversity or inclusion or belonging in academics. That being said, I think I'm established enough to start to move on to think about how to maintain or improve representation in the workforce. So I've been involved in some initiatives, including Women in Anesthesia locally at my own institution, and then at a national level working with the American Society of Anesthesiologists Committee on Professional Diversity to try to build workforce diversity there.
Wow, that's fantastic. It's a huge undertaking almost, and feels like maybe, do you ever feel like there's a lot on your resting on your shoulders, to try and increase awareness of kind of these issues? I hate to call them issues, really, though. I mean, and I guess this is another question. When we start talking about being, a woman in anesthesia, or, gender, or, diversity in anesthesia, it's sometimes an uncomfortable conversation, because you do feel either pigeonholed or feel like you have to talk about it. Whereas when you're working in practice, is it really an issue? Does that make sense?
It does make a lot of sense, and I think it's fair to call it an issue. I think when you look at the demographics of our population, when you look at the demographics of our patients, and then you look at our clinician population, there's a big difference there. And so I think it is worth something that's worth talking about, worth thinking about. It is a big sort of burden to think about, but there are a lot of us interested in advocating for workforce diversity and inclusion, so it's not any one of us that has to shoulder that entire burden, which makes it a little bit easier. But it is a big thing to think about.
Monty Mythen, editor-in-chief of Top Men Talk, has been able to sit down and join us. Monty.
Sorry to be a little bit late. Someone grabbed me in the corridor, but with an excellent question, and someone shared some very cool data with me. and the answer is, I can't tell you. You heard also in the session from Professor Helen Galley from the United Kingdom, about the Athena Swan system we have in the UK. What did you make of? Did you know about it before? And what did you make about all of that? I'll explain more about it in a second when I get your opinion.
So, no, I hadn't had the pleasure of hearing about the Athena Swan program before I came to the BJA meeting. It seems like a well-intentioned idea to get universities interested in and demonstrating their commitment to diversity and inclusion for women. I think that, like some of the initiatives in the United States, I'm thinking specifically of affirmative action, some well-meaning ideas can be translated into initiatives that can be a little bit ham-handed or a little bit blunt. So I think think that's what's happening with the Athena Swan, is that they've initiated a conversation about inclusion and belonging in academic medicine or in academics in general. But the devil's in the details. So I think there's a lot of details to be worked out to see whether that's actually led to real change as opposed to people sort of checking boxes on a form.
My institutional experience has been largely a very positive one. I think part of it was when people introduced the original idea, it promoted so much debate and discussion that drove up awareness of, let's call it, the issue. So when we looked around the room and thought, hang on a second, we're all old white guys talking about this, that's a good point. And then I think the way it's translated is not by inappropriately promoting people just because they're female. It's when given clear choice, you go down the female route rather than the male route, which starts to bring some balance in it. And the other really important thing is turning around and saying, don't have meetings at crazy times, which is important to all of us. All of us get involved in childcare or caring for other people. So stop the crazy time meetings, put them at sensible times.
Meghan, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you was your view on social media and how it's working to either promote or distract from some of the things that you're doing, because I think some things that are out there on social media may not always be positive and help us to actually grow.
So I'm a big proponent of social media. I think that it won't fix everything, clearly, and for people that aren't inclined to use social media, I don't think that they need to take a long time out of their life to learn how to use it. The reason I find it useful is that it helps build community. So whether it's academics doing research or whether it's women in anesthesia learning to advocate for themselves, you create a large virtual community of people who are like-minded. I think particularly for people who are underrepresented in any given discipline, there's a lot of questioning yourself. There's a lot of imposter syndrome. There's a lot of wondering whether what you're experiencing is real, whether it's important. And you can get some validation. You can do some reality testing. You can get sort of that pat on the back that says, yes, actually, this is an issue. You should be thinking about it. And so I think social media is hugely useful for that, especially for folks that may be isolated in sort of specialty disciplines.
What do you think's grown the most out of social media? Have you created whole other networks that are offline that have created social support and support that way, or is it mainly based just on real-time kind of social media things?
I'd say there's a bit of a lag in terms of building offline networks, but I have started to make offline connections that start in social media, and I've had the experience at several conferences where someone will walk up to me and they'll go, Meghan, I follow you on Twitter, and I go, hi. And so it's really nice to start that conversation, whereas someone, I might not have gone up to someone at a meeting, or they might not come up to me, but because you feel like you have even just a little bit of a connection, it makes that conversation easier to have.
I hope to talk to you soon to see where the movement grows and everything that you're doing in that space. Let's go back just quickly, because we're going to have to get back to the conference here in just a second. Love the idea of implementation science and how to translate evidence into practice. Can you take us a little bit down that and tell us what exactly you're doing and any trials and things that you're working on?
Sure. So implementation science is a really exciting new discipline. When I say new, really got its sea legs in about the 1980s, but it's a discipline that's interested in bridging the evidence to practice gap. What we mean by that is that there are scores of evidence-based interventions that have shown efficacy in trials, large randomized controlled trials, and yet these evidence-based practices aren't being used, either because they're too complex or because the contexts in which they were studied are very different than the contexts in which they're used. So implementation science is trying to build up empiric approaches to facilitating the uptake of evidence-based practice in care. Implementation science, although we say it's new, actually draws from management theory, it draws from organization theory, it draws from psychology, it draws from human factors engineering, it draws from some of the evaluation literature in public health. And so the underpinnings, the theoretical underpinnings of implementation science are not new at all. But the application of it specifically on facilitating this uptake is new. And that's what I hope to bring to the trials community. And that's actually why I'm here in Prato, is to talk about some implementation science studies.
That's absolutely fantastic. I mean, it's such a challenge, especially you mentioned human factors and how that plays a role. Is that something that you're focusing in one area, or how are you dealing with the human? piece?
When I say human factors, I mean very specifically human factors human factors engineering, which is also known as ergonomics. The idea behind human factors is it concerns the ability of people to do work. So in America, when you say ergonomics, we think about chairs.
Yeah.
That's part of it. That's physical ergonomics, is how you configure spaces for work. But cognitive ergonomics is also part of that, and how we think, how we structure thinking, how much we expect people to remember. The whole literature behind cognitive aids has a basis in ergonomics. And then the part of ergonomics or human factors that I'm most interested in is what we call macroergonomics, which is policies and processes and systems. So how do people work together to accomplish work? And as I think about both designing interventions to improve communication, which is where my heart is, but also designing interventions that can be implemented, human factors engineering comes into that. So we start thinking about workflow, we start thinking about usability, we think about the user experience, and so that may be the patient, but oftentimes it's the clinician. As we're designing interventions and trying to get them into practice, we need to make sure that those interventions actually dovetail with the clinician's workflow, because they're not going to do them if it doesn't fit into their workflow. So it's great to design an intervention that works in theory when you have a research coordinator that's standing there watching you, but we also need to make sure that these interventions work in everyday practice.
Well, Meghan, thank you so much for sitting down with us. I could literally talk to you the rest of the afternoon, but I'm glad you were able to spare just a couple minutes to sit down with us on Top Med Talk. Hopefully we can do it again and hear more. I'd love to hear your take after we finish up the meeting and kind of your takeaways and things like that. But thanks again, and look forward to talking to you soon.
Top Med Talk.
Just a quick reminder, subscribe to Top Med Talk. We're a daily source of news and conversation focused on perioperative care. We bring you all the latest talk from all the major conferences in the perioperative space. We can also be found on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and we now have a free mailing list with special offers and additional goodies for subscribers. Go check us out at topmedtalk.com. That's www.topmedtalk.com.